Hello and welcome to the Mission TV show. Today we have a special guest with us from Grenada, and you may not know where Grenada is, but it's in the it's in the Caribbean, which is a beautiful area to go. I've never been there myself, but the pictures I've seen are pretty beautiful. And he's there not on a vacation. He's been there for quite a while, and we're going to find out about that. I'd like to introduce to you John Bartels.
Thank you.
John, thanks for being with us. And Grenada is, which part of the Caribbean is it?
It's one of the last islands in the chain of islands before you run into South America. About 90 miles off the coast of Venezuela.
So how far from the equator is Grenada? It's not very
We're at 12 degrees north.
So what temperature do you have in the summertime?
Well, we have 80s pretty much year-round.
So there's no real summer, no winter?
There's a dry season and a rainy season.
So, okay. So how long does your rainy season last?
Rainy season is roughly June to December, and the dry season's the other half of the year.
Okay, so does it like rain continually during that time? Or?
No, it's just a lot more rain than the other half of the year. It's interesting, the rain will come for short periods of time and then it's sunny and nice again. So.
Do you get any typhoons coming through?
Typhoons, well, hurricanes in the Atlantic. Yes, we do. We've had a couple of hurricanes that have gone through Grenada that were, well, the first one was incredibly devastating. Hurricane Ivan in 2004. It was a Category 4 hurricane and destroyed probably 80% of the buildings, at least had major damage.
Wow.
The roof over our building was gone, and the building we had just renovated was in bad shape afterwards.
Wow.
So yeah, and then there was one smaller one after that, and we haven't had any since then, thankfully.
Now, were you born and raised in Grenada?
No, I was born in California, Southern California, and about the age of 10 we moved to Seattle, where I lived until we went to Grenada.
Okay. Now you have a favorite text, which may bring some highlight into how you ended up in Grenada.
Well, go ahead with the text.
Yeah, it's John 20:21. It says, Jesus said to them again, "Peace to you, as my Father has sent me, so send I you." And tell us how you ended up in Grenada and what you're there for and what you're doing. And
how we ended up in Grenada seems to be a whole string of events that God takes us through, and I try to pinpoint where the starting point is, and then I realize He was preparing us before that. But I think the story really begins on my way home from work one night, and I was thinking about the busyness of life and going to work, going home, paying the bills, and doing it over again.
And what kind of work were you doing at that time?
I'm an electronic engineer specializing in test and reliability engineering.
Okay.
And so I was thinking about this, and there was just something missing. There had to be more to life than just that. And I was involved in my church, held a number of positions, but there was just something missing. And I said to God, while I was driving home, I want to go to the next level. And I have no idea what that meant, to be honest. I forgot about that prayer, but God didn't. And He took us on a family vacation to California, and we were visiting the Adventist World Radio display at camp meeting in California. And while we were there, one of the VPs was giving my wife and I a tour of all the different displays and explaining things to us. And this thought went through my head, ask him about employment. And I thought real quick, quit my career, leave my home, move to Guam. I'm not sure I'm that interested. And honestly, I hesitated. And just a few seconds later, my wife said, what's it take for a guy like John to get a job with AWR? He's an engineer.
Wow.
And I'm sure my mouth just did what yours just did, just probably hit the floor. But we talked a little bit about it. We exchanged business cards, and I promised to send a resume. And when we went outside, my wife and I talked about it. We realized God spoke to both of us at the same time, said the same thing.
Wow.
And that started the ball rolling. We did send the resumes to AWR, and a number of things took place but God kept closing the doors there, which was really confusing to me. But then He led me to a friend of mine who had worked with them and just come back after 6 years of service. He says, you know, you need to call this other person at AWR, but you know, I was at church last Sabbath and this guy was just speaking about missions, and he's looking for broadcast engineers. And here's his number, you should call him. Now, I have to be real honest. I wasn't looking to go to the mission field at the time, but if God wanted me to go, I was willing. So I put the number aside, and at the same time, I was looking for a new job. And I found a position I was interested in, prepared my resume, and I was about to hit send on the email when God spoke to me. He says, you can't send that resume until you call the phone number your friend gave you. That was definitely a very interesting moment. I called my wife, and she came down to my office, and we prayed together. And we said, okay, Lord, please open the doors you want us to walk through and close the ones you don't. We finished our prayer. I got back up, I pushed send on the email, and I dialed the phone number. And a person I really didn't know before at all, really, answered the phone, and his name was David Gates.
It's one miracle that he actually answered the phone.
I say that often. So he listened to our story, and he said, yeah, it looks like God's really leading you. And he says, I have two opportunities for you. One's in Guyana and one's in Grenada. And I honestly didn't know where Grenada was at that moment. But somehow I knew that's where God wanted us to go.
Wow.
And so we hung up the phone, and we prayed. We say, Lord, if you want us to go to Grenada, take my job away.
So you were in a job looking for another job.
I was.
You weren't between jobs.
Right, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you asked God. I don't hear very many prayers like that.
No, and I don't recommend you pray unless you really mean it. Because it wasn't more than maybe about a month later, on the 21st of December for Christmas, I got a layoff notice.
Really? Wow.
And a week later, we put our house on the market and began preparing to move to Grenada.
Wow. So you've been there now how many years?
10 years.
10 years.
Yeah.
And what's the work that you're doing there now in broadcasting?
Right now we have a FM radio station that's on the air 24/7, covering the southern half of Grenada. At the same time, we're in the process of building a TV studio and broadcast facility, which is approximately a third of the way done. We're also in the process of buying land to build volunteer housing and a larger studio that we hope to build very soon.
Okay. So the radio that you have, it's also on the internet, I understand.
Yes, it is.
And where can someone go to listen?
You can pick that up at globalfamilynetwork.net.
Okay, globalfamilynetwork.net.
That's correct.
And I just want to say that I've heard quite a number of people say that it's the best radio station for, especially if you're, for Christians, if you're a believer, that they've ever heard. So it's a beautiful source of music for your home, just to keep out the negative spirits. And I've heard a lot of people talking about how when that music's on, that the whole world seems brighter. So I'm sure that it's being a light to people that we don't even know.
I know it is. Occasionally our signal will go off the air, and there's a way to respond on the internet. And we've gotten emails when that has happened from all sides of the world.
And that's the challenge kind of broadcasting, is that the signal goes out, but you have no idea who's watching or listening at any given time. So it's kind of like an act of faith.
It really is.
Yeah.
Many times you're sitting in that little room, especially my wife who's doing most of the programming right now, and you sit there and you do all this, but you really don't know who you're impacting. Thankfully though, people do give us feedback. We hear from a variety of people how many people are listening in Grenada. All different walks of life, all different religions, people are listening. Occasionally we get phone calls, and people will comment on the wonderful spiritual messages and all the things they're learning. Sometimes, one time I remember we got a call from a lady who was saying, wow, that was an incredible message. Everybody needs to hear that message. Those kinds of messages come, and the other thing I want to see more of, but it's awesome. We had one lady who was listening, and she understood the message. It took her to a crusade. They have a tent crusades in Grenada where everybody gets under a large tent, lots of people. And she listened to the messages and she was baptized.
Praise the Lord.
So
Well, that paid for your radio station.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So now you're working on television.
That's correct.
And this text that you is one of your favorite texts, "So send I you," that has a special memory for you.
Absolutely.
Tell us that story.
It was about 2007, and I was in the middle of designing the radio station. I actually completed the design of the radio station, and I was waiting for funds, and they didn't come, and they didn't come. And it was 2008, I believe, if I remember right.
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt like it was time for God to provide for this equipment. And I didn't have a penny, didn't have whether to travel or buy equipment or do anything. And I was just praying for God's direction. And there was a mission airplane in South America that was flying north. And I knew that if I made the arrangements that I could get on board that airplane, fly to the U.S. and buy equipment. But I needed to know if I went, if God would give me the money that I needed. And so I was up early one morning praying and really seeking God's direction. And I was praying through a passage and asking God to speak to me through your word. I really need to know what you want me to do. I don't want to do anything on my own. And I was praying and reading, and I got all the way through the passage, and I got no answer. And I pleaded with God to please give me that answer that he wanted me to have. And the thought went through my head, reread what you just read. So I started right back at the top again, and I read through, and right in the middle, it just jumped out at me, "Go in peace, as the Father sent me, so send I you." And I knew God had spoke to me. So I made the arrangements. I flew to the U.S. 1 week after arriving here, I had $20,000
Wow.
to start our project with.
Wow. Somebody donated those funds.
Yep.
And if you hadn't gone, they probably wouldn't have donated them?
Honestly, I don't know that half of the story.
Okay.
How it all came through, I'm not sure exactly.
And that's how you purchased your equipment and started your radio.
That started, the majority, well, a good portion of our equipment, the master control equipment, and we needed a significant amount of funds additionally, which came again later when we were praying and God answered.
And so now you're working on going from radio into television.
That's correct.
And you have a background in television?
No, I don't.
So you've been designing the studio and designing your equipment needs and layout and everything. And what keeps you going forward with this design? Because you've been there 10 years. And what is it that day to day keeps you going forward, that motivates you?
Well, I know without a doubt that God called us. And I know when he called us to build a TV station and radio. I thought TV was going to be the priority, but radio came first. And I just committed to God, committed to do what he's asked me to do. No matter how difficult it might get, I wouldn't do anything differently unless he told me so.
So God's called you there, and just the desire or the commitment to do what he's called you to do. And so if he ever calls you to go to a different place or go somewhere else,
then I would go.
Yeah. But at this point, you're committed to that.
That's right.
Area. So I understand, and I read from some publications that the Gospel Commission is pretty much completed. 95% of the world has access to the gospel if they want it, is what we read, and actually my daughter read in her Bible study lesson. What's your take on it since you've been overseas?
Well, I would be curious to know where they came up with that number. In Grenada, we actually have one of the highest percentages of Adventists of anywhere in the world.
Wow.
It's 11 or 12% Adventists.
Wow.
But what about the 88% of the rest of them that haven't heard this message or know portions of it and need to know so much more? And Grenada is an island, but they have all the media that the rest of the world has. And it's had a dramatic impact on them and the way they live. What about all those people who don't realize what it is that they're serving? They're serving the world. They're serving what they think makes them happy. but it leads to unhappiness and eventually destruction. They need to know. And not only Grenada, our primary target audience is Caribbean people. And we intend to reach them by satellite, and there's actually more Caribbean people living in the eastern United States and Canada and England than there are living in the Caribbean.
Really?
And when I speak of Caribbean people, I'm really focusing on the English-speaking Caribbean people.
I see.
So our long-range goal is to reach them via satellite.
So what percentage of people living in Grenada speak English then?
That's the primary language.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you find very few people that speak a different language.
I see. So then the total population of the Caribbean people, what would you estimate that to be?
The Caribbean as a whole, I really don't know. In Grenada, there's about 100,000 people.
So relatively small, but throughout the eastern seaboard of the United States and UK, you could be pushing over 1 million.
Potentially.
Yeah. So then, if your station is broadcasting from the Caribbean, then the people from living in the other countries would like to see a taste of back home, so that would be attractive
Absolutely.
to them.
And I suspect that English-speaking people everywhere would be interested in a network that has a different culture behind it too.
Sure.
And that's our goal.
Sure, especially coming from a place like Grenada.
Yeah, yeah. It's a beautiful place. Yeah.
So do you see a need for more people to be involved with God's work?
Oh, absolutely. That's next to funds. People is probably harder to get than the funds. Finding people who are committed, who will just go and do whatever God asks them to, is probably one of our biggest needs.
And do you get a lot of people calling you and saying, "I'd like to come," but
Unfortunately not. We do have a few people that call here and there. We have one person who's interested in coming right now, that we're very interested in having come work with us. But our team is very small. Primarily my wife, and we have one lady who works part-time with us whose husband's going to school in Grenada. And we have a local Grenadian gentleman who's working with us and helping quite a bit. But other than that, we're really needing a lot of people.
So you've been there for 10 years with your family. It must be a real hardship to have your family there, away from everything that's happening and away from America and everything like that. Has it been a challenge for your family to be missionaries?
I think we see both sides. There's a lot of blessings in it, and there are a lot of challenges. The incredible thing is that when you go through challenges, and we've been through several, or more than several, and every time we come up to one, it's difficult. But God takes you through it, and through it, He teaches you something you weren't aware of before. And He makes you a better person when you come out the other end. And I don't know that I could have experienced the growth in my own Christian walk had I stayed home. The experience is something that you just can't duplicate somewhere else.
And then that must impact your wife and your kids also, when your Christian experience grows.
Absolutely. And theirs grows too, because they go through the challenges too.
Yeah. So in the world, a challenge is a challenge, and you try to avoid them as much as possible. But in Christ, what is a challenge?
A challenge is any trial we go through that Christ uses to better us, make us a better person.
So a challenge in Christ is actually a good thing.
Actually, very good. And the promise in Romans 8:28, all things work together for good. And James tells us we're supposed to count it all joy. And that's a difficult one to swallow for all of us, I think. But I can see it coming through many major challenges, that when you come out the other end, we really wouldn't have it any other way. Because it really does draw us closer to Christ and helps us understand our need of Him more and more.
So when you look at your life now, I would say not quite so financially well off, maybe trusting in God for day to day or month to month survival.
Right.
And you look at your life back the way you had it when you're living in Seattle and you had the nice house and you had the good paycheck and everything.
Right.
How would you compare? Would you want to go back to that life? Do you sometimes think, I wish I could just leave this and go back to the way it was?
Sometimes that temptation becomes real. It does. But what would you be walking away from? You'd be walking away from doing the task that will reach countless people. I couldn't do that unless God told me to for some reason.
So you couldn't do that because of the, and when you know, it's like, when are you going to see the fruit of your effort, because I'm sure you go into that little room and think, this is all I have, or this is all there is. When's the payoff for you?
The payoff comes in little pieces here and there that we get a taste of, but I think the real payoff will be in heaven, because it'll be then that we realize who was touched and how many people were touched, and how it impacted them and how it resulted in them being in the kingdom. I'm looking forward to that.
And how long is that payoff going to last?
Eternity.
Yeah. So, and how many more years do you expect to be on this earth?
I don't expect to be here long. I believe we're at the end of time. I believe there's only a few short years left in this world. And that's another reason for not wanting to go back to the old way. What would be the gain? You just lose it anyhow. Not only do you lose the opportunity to reach souls for Christ, you lose, well, you're going to lose whatever you would gain by going back. I mean, it would just go away anyhow.
So like if you went back and got a nice house, very soon it would end up in a fire.
That's right. Sooner or later we have to leave it.
Yeah. So what would you, if you could have an appeal, if you could make an appeal, if you could say to anybody what's on your heart and what you would recommend for them in their walk with Christ, what would you say? Would you say, you know, stay where you are, don't come out here, it's scary, or would you say, trust God?
I would definitely say trust God. I would pray to Him daily, asking Him, how can I serve you? What can I do, whether it's right here or whether it's some other place in the world that I can do to serve you? God gives us many different talents and skills and abilities, personalities. Every one of us can do something, whether it's big or small. And we're told if we ask, God will answer. Seek, and we'll find what God wants us to find. Knock, and that door will be opened. I'd ask, seek, and knock daily. How can I serve you, Lord? Where can I go? And don't stop asking until He gives an answer. And He will lead.
Do you think it's vital or important that we serve God, or do we just need to accept Him into our life?
I don't know how you can accept Him and not serve Him. The two just don't go together in my mind.
Because He is a servant.
Yeah, He is a servant. He is our example. He led as a servant, and we're to learn from Him on how we are to live our lives.
So what do you think is going to happen? Because when I look out in the world, and correct me if you see a different picture, but I don't see the gospel going to all the world right now. When I'm in Thailand and I see that there's no Ellen White books in print, very few people even know that there is a Christ. 99% are non-Christian. And most of those people never even heard about Christianity. Something's got to change.
Yeah.
And what do you see? What do you see in your studies and in your vision and your prayers and everything like that? What do you think God is impressing? What do you think God's going to do?
Personally, I believe we're about to see a crisis. I believe things are going to take place in our world that are going to change the order of events on a day-to-day basis. People won't have life as usual anymore. We can see already major changes taking place in our world. I think what we've seen so far is just the beginning. And I think as these major changes take place in our world, more and more people are going to have questions. And as we are there to meet those questions with programming broadcast over radio, over TV, over satellite, they will have a place to go to get answers when they need them most. And I believe the result of that is going to be an incredible harvest just before Jesus comes and takes us all home.
So your duty or your goal right now is to set up as many of those information distribution points
Exactly.
as possible.
Excellent.
So do you see, are you the only one in this network that's doing this, or?
No, I'm just one of probably at least a couple dozen networks around the world that are beginning broadcasting at one stage or another, preparing to share messages of God's love with the entire world. It's really exciting to see all of these leaders in God's work coming together and actually uniting right now and seeing how we can all work together, how we can tie our media centers together all around the world, how we can share information together, so that we can, as effectively as possible, get the message out to the entire world, not just Grenada or the Caribbean, but every country on the globe.
Yeah, in fact, we just had a convention, went to a convention, and there was like 25 from around the world that we all gathered together, and we prayed, and we went to the floor, and we saw all the amazing equipment, uplink trucks, production trucks, cameras. I mean, the tools are out there, aren't they?
Absolutely. More tools than you can imagine.
And God is bringing the point of entry lower and lower every year. Things get cheaper, more doable, more power.
Yeah.
Is that exciting to you to see all that?
Absolutely. Those are the tools to accomplish the work.
Yeah.
And to see more tools, and tools that work better than they used to, more effectively, more easy to use. Yeah, that's really exciting.
So do you think a donation to a media ministry is a good investment?
I don't think you could make a more effective investment in terms of dollars or pennies per individual reached.
Right.
If you actually invested $100,000 in a studio or into a broadcast facility, you're reaching potentially hundreds of thousands of people, or not, if not millions of people with that investment.
Right.
And when you divide it all up, the cost per person is incredibly low.
Right. So the cost of entry is high, but the cost per person, there's no cheaper way to reach that many.
And how are you going to reach the people in the cities?
Right.
How are you going to reach people in apartments and skyrises and
With
businesses?
Security and locked doors and...
Or even just to have that large an army to accomplish it, if you could get there.
Right.
Without media. And it's interesting too, people get really uncomfortable when they're listening or approached on a religious level.
Right.
But if they can listen in their car, or they can watch on their TV in their own living room, and quietly just evaluate for themselves,
Right.
how much more effective is that at reaching them than confronting them sometimes? Many people just want to just try it out for themselves for a while.
Right.
And once they're comfortable, then they walk through the church doors.
And the beautiful thing about television and radio is that they can have it on for years.
Yep.
Learning, and you may never see the fruit, but the seeds are planted and they may have a relationship with the Lord without them ever walking through a church door.
Absolutely.
So, well, it's been a pleasure, John, talking with you and hearing your story, how God has led in your life, and the vision that God has placed there. And I just want to encourage you to think bigger. Think bigger than, will I survive this year, this week, this month? And God has given that verse to each one of us, not just to John, not just to his wife, but to each one of us. So send I you, as God has sent Jesus, so he sends us into the world, a world that is looking and longing for something better. And the payoff will come soon, as you, I'm sure, have seen in the news and in the world events, that this world is coming to a close very soon. And now is the time to follow Christ into the waiting multitude and share what you have been given with others. And I just thank you for being with us, John, and thank you for watching the Mission TV show. And until next time, God bless, and I pray that you will hear his voice as he calls you today.